Azuku Midoriya was born in a very unusual way. Azuku was born from the energy and power of a vessel that many did not know of. He was brought upon this world because of a whole different idea and a whole different universe. Back in another universe, there was a Namekian, the last known Namekian, at least at that time, and more Namekians would eventually grow and eventually spread out throughout the world. But he was known as a Namekian that was all-powerful, one of the Dragon Warrior clan combined with various other clans through the absorption technique that Namekians have. His power would build up throughout the years, through years and years of training and hard labor. Piccolo, the one we know, the green monster himself, Piccolo from Namek, would eventually grow to power that was universal. He would believe that one day he would pass on, that one day he would die. So he decided to spit out an egg that many, would know as the future Piccolo. But the only thing is, this egg was far different. It seemed when this egg was spit out by Piccolo, let's just say, it didn't go exactly how he thought it would. This egg was special. It would transcend universes and basically turn into a spirit itself, a soul you can think of, and that soul would arrive one day at Inko Midoriya's doorstep, and when Azuku Midoriya would come about, the soul of that being that Piccolo spit out would go within her son. Years would pass on, Azuku would be born, and Azuku would be different than many others. Insane strength, insane regeneration, it was odd. He would break tables on accident when he was just a child. Small cuts he would get would regenerate in seconds. Azuku would be so different. But during this time, his quirk began to manifest. Or at least that's what they began to think it was. It wasn't exactly a quirk though, it was far different. His skin would start growing this light shade of green, but it seems like it was controllable. Azuku would sometimes focus really hard and the green would go away. But when he would allow the green to absorb his body entirely, his skin would become thicker, become different. It would feel as if he could stretch his limbs around houses, around buildings, around countries, it would feel sometimes. This is how he felt when he was in this green form. Antennas of some sorts would grow on his head, and he would look like the green Piccolo we know so much and know so well. The last Namekian is now here on planet Earth, but in a society that is far different than the one he would have been in an entirely different universe. Azuku Midoriya, at the age of about 5, would have struggles with controlling, basically turning into this quote-unquote green monster. At least that's what that would be referenced as when all the kids would bully him or be terrified of him. Nonetheless, Azuku would sit on his couch and watch his television, looking at the one and only number one hero, All Might. That's all he cared about. That's all he could think about. How could he eventually become the number one hero? Protect everyone. Save everyone. That's the goal of Azuku Midoriya, and that's going to be the goal of the last Namekian. Azuku would go throughout his years trying to stay looking like everybody else, but quickly at the age of 10 to 12 he would realize something, that it didn't matter anymore, that the true form that he needed to be in was the one that everyone feared, was the one that truly made him powerful. So he began to live in that form, getting used to his strength. Of course, he wouldn't be insanely powerful off the bat. Of course, he would probably break simple stools, tables, stuff like that, just like he did when he was younger. But he knew that there were more, and there was more to being this so-called Namekian. He's been told by his doctors and told by everyone, every specialist he can possibly find, that it's just some sort of strength enhancement, regenerative type of quirk. But Azuku knows that it's more, that there has to be more. He can sense it. When he's in this form, his knowledge would advance, and he can sense and tell that there's more to it than just, well, something simple as, oh, you're stronger and you're more durable. It's more to it than just that. The knowledge he senses is one that he realizes that there were people just like him, ones that grew up on a planet by the name of Namek. Azuku would speak to his mother about this, but every record book, everything, they couldn't find a word about it. Everything about space would have nothing about this so-called other planet. Azuku would feel as if there were nothing about people like him. Nonetheless, though, Azuku would begin to train at the age of 12, beginning to actually learn and get a grip for his power. As time would pass on, the stronger he would get. He would realize that his power broadened just beyond his strength enhancement and regenerative powers. He could basically stretch out his limbs, grow his body. On top of that, he could control something that he wouldn't know is known as ki, but would know as a power that is basically this flashy blast, explosions, everything that he can use, controlling and manipulating this ki within his body without even knowing that's exactly what it is. Azuku would begin to learn how to use this from 13 to 14 to now 15 years old. Azuku has been gaining and getting stronger throughout this entire time. A connection with something that he doesn't even know really even exists in a different plane of a universe. Azuku would begin to learn more and more, or gain more and more knowledge from seemingly nowhere. It seems that he now knows that he's known as a Namekian, or at least some hybrid version of one. A Namekian that basically doesn't even need food, just water. While in this form, he realizes this relatively quickly. Azuku, of course, now that he's older, he has become more comfortable literally in his skin. Azuku has realized that it doesn't really matter what these other people think, and that his strength is all that truly matters in the large grand scheme of things. Of course, his goal is to become the #1 hero. That means becoming the strongest hero he possibly can right now. And that means obviously going to the one and only UA. Toward the end of his school year, obviously being at the age of 15 and the end of his middle school, he begins to listen to the teacher as he explains that he was going to hand out some career aptitude test, but he already knows that, well, they all want to go the hero route. He throws the papers in the sky, and Azuku is just listening to everything as the teacher explains. The teacher even regards Azuku as a possible candidate for, well, being a part or getting a chance at a good hero school, maybe even UA. Bakugo would begin to say that he's going to be the only person out of this crappy school to actually get into UA, and that if anyone thinks otherwise, they're just stupid. The teacher, though, of course, doesn't listen to the students and knows that Azuku is pretty strong. He's seen it, and he's actually spoken to his mother, Inko Midoriya, about why he stays in the form that he's in. After learning about it, he doesn't really argue with it. He doesn't really deem it as if Azuku is using his quirk. That's just who Azuku is now. So he takes that into account, and he's seen the efforts that Azuku has made in terms of just seeing him work in gym class and stuff like that. He's been taking things very seriously. Any teacher with a common sense, or just, a brain in general, would see this out of a child. Azuku would continue listening, and would listen as Bakugo would blast the table right in front of him. The teacher would tell Bakugo to calm down and not to use his quirk as he's doing so. And the other students argue that Azuku is as well, but the teacher thinks that, he's always been doing this, and that doesn't give an excuse for Bakugo to try and blow him up. Nonetheless, Azuku would continue throughout the class, and eventually the school day would be over. Azuku would then be heading out, grabbing all his stuff, and Bakugo would grab him by the arm and immediately pressure him, saying that he should just basically take his own life, saying that he should jump off the top of the building and that he wouldn't amount to anything. Azuku then says that even if he did jump off the top of the building, he wouldn't die. He would just, well, hover right before he landed flat on his face. Azuku would break free of Bakugo's grip, and relatively easily at that, walking out and leaving Bakugo kind of speechless. Did Azuku just say he could fly? Well, sort of. He can kind of hover. He's not really very good at flying just quite yet, but he's going to learn and basically try to channel this so-called ki over this next course of the 10 months. Azuku would head off and begin basically leaving, and as he does, he heads under this bridge. And when he heads through the bridge, he begins writing notes about his power, Bakugo's power, any powers he's really seen, any quirks he's really seen. Because of course, that is the Azuku we all know and love. He begins to study and basically learn more things as he moves, and the brain of a Namekian, or the brain of himself in this form, is allowing him to basically figure out so many different things that he would have never known when he was younger. Ever since he's basically channeled this Namekian side of himself, he's been learning more and more, and faster at that. Anything that he would learn in school, he would pick up almost instantaneously, and he begins to learn more and more wisdom, or just gains more and more wisdom from basically the Namekian knowledge that was in his so-called past. Azuku would continue on through this bridge though, and noises would begin to be heard underneath the ground. He begins to get confused and a little bit taken back, but he continues to walk as the manhole cover beneath him blows open. A giant sludge villain would then show up out of nowhere, mocking toward Azuku and telling him that he needs his body. Immediately, Azuku would take into action, stretching out his arm and slinging himself the opposite direction, knowing that he shouldn't be fighting this so-called sludge villain. He immediately grabs the top of a building, sending himself up and sitting on the very top as he watches the sludge villain try and come after him. Azuku would then jump over the sludge villain as he climbs up the building and goes right past it, running back underneath the bridge. Just as he does this, the sludge villain chases back. But just as Azuku goes past that manhole cover, someone else appears beneath, or basically coming from beneath the ground, screaming, "One Detroit Smash!" Immediately when he does this, Azuku knows exactly who this is. Seeing the sludge villain get blasted everywhere, he's completely stunned, but at the same time excited. That is the one and only All Might. He runs over toward All Might and begins to ask a bunch of questions. All Might is kind of taken back by the form that Azuku is in, but let's be honest, there are some creepy and weird looking people in My Hero Academia, so this doesn't really bother him that much. He does ask about what Azuku's quirk is and what exactly it entails. He basically explains that he's known as the last Namekian of some sorts. He begins to explain most aspects, but it kind of flies over All Might's head. He doesn't really understand it much, but he does say that with a quirk like that, Azuku can definitely become a very powerful hero. And Azuku asks if there's a chance that maybe he could become the #1 hero. And All Might says that with the right mentality and the right training, he could definitely become the #1 hero. He asks for Azuku's help to basically absorb clean up the sludge villain, putting him in a bottle and in multiple bottles and stuff like that. And Azuku would watch as All Might jumps away, and he sees that All Might, while he wasn't paying attention, signed in his notebook, just in big writing, All Might, which that's not really a signature, but hey, he'll take what he can get. He begins to head home to his mother, and in complete excitement, telling her about everything that just happened. Yeah, he was attacked by a villain, so that does kind of worry her, but at the same time, he got an autograph from All Might. All Might saved him. He learned that he could be the #1 hero from the #1 hero himself. This makes Azuku completely motivated to train, get stronger. That's all he wants to do now. That's all he can think about. The warrior clan side of Azuku's Namekian is definitely showing. Definitely this want and will to just win and get stronger is something Azuku is making very prevalent. And Inko, obviously Azuku's mother, says that she will give him whatever means necessary to basically allow him to do that. And this is the first start, showing him a gym membership and also other places he can go to get a nice spar in, boxing places, jiu-jitsu places, anything like that to sharpen up his skills. From what she's seen, he can learn how to box and learn how to basically grapple with people from just watching it on TV. So what can he do in a real life scenario? That must be insanely basically beneficial for him. So Azuku would take full advantage. Of course, he would get weird looks at the gym sometimes, but when he would head over to the boxing gym and also jiu-jitsu gyms and judo gyms and anything you can think of, Muay Thai, everything, they wouldn't actually give him weird looks. They would think of him as a martial artist. That's what he wanted to be. He wanted to get stronger, he wanted to be better at fighting, and they respected that entirely out of him. So they would teach him as much as he possibly could, and quickly Azuku would get better than most of these people, but would also have to hold back on his pure strength. They would tell him this in the very beginning, that he needs to learn technique, not brute force. And of course, Azuku didn't really know much of a difference between this, and once he begins to learn technique, they explained, he'll be able to combine that with brute force and become a very powerful martial artist. So Azuku would begin to learn restraint. For about 5 to 6 months, that's all he does. Learning more martial arts and stuff like that, learning these techniques, picking them up almost instantly. Immediately, if he's taught a certain leg sweep, if he's taught a certain way to take someone down, if he's taught a certain combination, he practically learns it in a matter of minutes. And not just learns it, he basically masters it, learning how to do these techniques flawlessly. Azuku would outgrow the gym relatively quickly, but he would promise to come back if he learned anything new and maybe if he could teach them something in return. Of course, they would say that there is no owing or there is no debt in martial arts, but they'll take what they can get if he learns something new. Azuku is happy to hear this and begins to head off to the gym once again and just find an open place, maybe a nice beach. And that's what he ends up finding. He finds a nice beach so he can just run, train, and not many people would even be around, so it'd be pretty easy for him to just, warm up and get ready. Azuku would continue this training and feel that his power is just more and more creeping on itself. It seems like he's getting stronger, his flight is getting better, his ki control is getting way better, and he can actually use small ki blasts now. Azuku would continue this training for months on end, and he would begin to learn more and more about the Namekians. Of course he knew about the whole warrior clan, but as he's gotten stronger, it seems like more and more information has entered his mind. This idea, this wish-granting type of clan, supposedly they are able to make dragons. Azuku begins to think that there's no way he can make a dragon. He must be some specific Namekian. Maybe he's some just warrior Namekian. I mean, he's always been gifted with pure strength, so it wouldn't make sense for him to be able to do something like that, right? He's not so sure. He has so little information, and maybe he'll never get information like that. But we'll never know until, the near future. Azuku would continue his training, continues his studying, everything you can possibly think of to prepare for UA. And Azuku would eventually have a little bit of extra free time just to relax. A week before the UA exam, he decides that he'll do some studying here and there, but he wants to rest his body because he's been going crazy with how much training he's been doing. Even implementing some weighted vests and also some cool little gear that he found from the store to add to his training. He basically puts weights on top of him to make his training a little bit harder and also give him some more, strength in return. Azuku would finally creep toward the day of the UA exam, the first exam for the rest of his life. Frankly, this exam means the world to Azuku. Inko would drive him over there, drop him off, and wish her child good luck, because this means so much to them, to him, and his entire life from here on out. That's a lot of pressure on a kid, and frankly, that's kind of how this world is, and Azuku has realized this from the wisdom and intelligence of basically being a Namekian. Azuku would approach the UA, or basically the UA entrance, and he would look to his right and look to his left to see multiple kids, or tons of them, basically coming into the UA entrance exam. This is wild to him. He's never seen so many people, and they must all be gifted to the point that they all have a chance. And they're not even really looking at him oddly. But just as he walks into the area and walks through the front door, he would realize that the eyes would eventually get to him, and they would realize that he looks very odd, weird, but nonetheless, he didn't really care. He's used to it. But as he sat down, he sat right next to the one and only Bakugo himself, and that's where his seat was. Unfortunately, he would have to deal with Bakugo for a little bit, but he's been dealing with him all his life, so, I mean, what's a couple more minutes so that they can get to testing? President Mike would then be in front of everybody and begin to basically speak to everybody. What up, listeners? Everybody, get ready for the first portion of the exam. He would then explain that the exam, well, obviously they have to start with a written one, sending them all to a different room. Once they enter that said room, they take the test, and Azuku passes with flying colors, frankly finishing very quickly. Everything was very simple for him. The only problem is he kind of had to get multiple pens and pencils because he kept breaking them. Frankly, his hands are kind of freakish, and he's extremely strong, so he kind of snapped a couple of them in half, but hey, that's beyond the point, right? Azuku would finish the test, and to him, he believed that he passed relatively easily on that regard, and began to think about what the practical exam would entail. Eventually, President Mike would have everybody enter the big auditorium once again, and he would explain to everybody what it would entail. And it basically had a bunch of robots. 1-pointer, 2-pointer, 3-pointer, and then obviously we have the 0-pointer, but that is something to completely ignore. Immediately, Tenya Ida would stand up and basically would say that President Mike didn't even explain the 0-pointer because, well, that was before he even got the chance. And of course, oh, he's just being annoying. And Azuku, and he would even point out how Azuku is being distracting with some of the stuff he's been saying to himself, basically trying to analyze what is to come. Azuku then wraps his arm around Tenya Ida by stretching it out, sitting him back to the chair, and tells him to not interrupt President Mike again, and that he wasn't even bothering anybody. And the only person that really was bothering people was him. Azuku would then listen to President Mike, finish his explanation, and they would head out to the gates to get ready for the practical exam. The practical exam is where everything will change. This means, or this will show how strong Azuku currently is. He hasn't really been able to fight people or really destroy or test his limits here, so this will be a good chance. He begins to wait for it to swing open, and just as it does, he goes flying out of it. Yes, he hasn't mastered flying, so he's not going to be able to fully control flying up, down, all around, but he can definitely fly straight and hover at a small height. So he'll be able to just fly out insanely quick and go immediately to some of these robots. Flying straight through them, he can feel that his strength is far enough to destroy a ton of these. He shoots ki blasts and punches through multiple. He begins to destroy one after another with relative ease, and eventually he'd feel pretty confident about what he's done so far. He begins to just look at his hands and move his arms and feels good. He's never felt like this before. Fighting makes him excited. Yes, he's done some combat, boxing, stuff like that, but that's different when you have to hold back. Of course, it is fun to an extent, but he's not holding back here. He's punching through robots as much as he wants, and he's smashing through them with relative ease. So he's a happy person right now, happy to see that all of his training has definitely paid off. And even with the weighted clothing he has on right now, it's pretty easy. And nobody even knows that he would be about one step slower because of this weighted clothing. That's the funny part. Eventually, he would kind of, destroy a couple more robots to ensure that he would get into UA, but he would be happy with the fact that he feels pretty confident. But just as he is pretty confident, he sees a robot, a giant one, a 0-pointer come out of the woodworks. and he would realize that maybe he should just head off and see if there's anybody that needs to get out. But he doesn't see anybody until it's actually a little too late. He hears a scream come from a girl, and he hears it with his big ears, obviously, and he flies over. He begins to push all the rubble off, and he's going to grab her and just run her away. But just as he's about to, he sees that there's a giant foot above him. He punches toward the foot, and it's able to stagger back the 0-pointer relatively well. Grabbing the girl and flying with her off, putting her back down, he sees the 0-pointer walk over, and he decides that since the 0-pointer didn't fall to one punch, he wants to try something out. Azuku would then put his pinky on his pinky and all the fingers to follow. His fingers would be touching, well, basically touching each other, and he'd make kind of a weird circle. In fact, he'd begin to basically focus all his energy to that said circle, and he'd focus all of his power, all of his ki. Light would begin to grow, and more light would begin to disperse from his hands and also within this ball of energy. Just as the 0-pointer walks toward him, all of the teachers watch on in complete, basically awe or just intrigue. What is this kid doing? What kind of quirk does he have? All Might, Aizawa, they're all interested in what he's about to do, and Azuku would release his hands and scream 2 words: Light Grenade. Immediately, this giant explosion would erupt from his hands, but it would incinerate the monster or the giant robot, but he would take a knee immediately. Okay, I thought that would tire me out, but damn, that just took so much out of me. He gets back up relatively easily, grabbing the girl and helping her to Recovery Girl, but now he knows that he's not quite ready to use that technique in a practical situation. Yeah, this might be a quote-unquote practical exam, but let's be honest, robots are not practical. And if he's going against someone that is stronger than that robot, that light grenade ain't gonna be very good when he's on the ground gasping for air. And even he knows that, so he tries to keep that in mind, but he never has gotten to use it against an opponent like that. So it does tell him his limitations in terms of his ki. In terms of pure strength, he probably would have been able to just beat up the robot relatively easily, but he did want to use some of his ki. That's kind of like the core power. If he elevates his ki, elevates his strength through ki, he should be able to basically close any gap between any villain if he basically does what he needs to do and with proper training. Azuku would then make sure that the girl's good, and Recovery Girl would say that she's just fine. She then introduces herself as Ochako Uraka, and he says that his name is Azuku Midoriya. He's surprised that the girl's not saying anything about his appearance, and Recovery Girl isn't either. He asks them about this, and they say that there are a lot of people out there that look far different, and what is she to complain when he just saved her? Azuku smiles slightly and thanks her for basically that conversation. Azuku would then head off, relatively confident, actually no, like almost guaranteeing himself that he's going to get into UA. He would arrive back at home, and Inko, his mother obviously, would congratulate him on a job well done, and Azuku would explain some of the downfalls that he's found out. Inko would immediately tell him to not be so hard on himself. He's still a kid, and he's going to be a first-year hero student. A student. Not some certified pro hero already. Nonetheless, it's finally about to begin, and the true hero journey would eventually begin for Azuku right when he gets a very special letter. A special letter from UA with basically a small hologram chip within it. He opens it up to see the one and only All Might himself. All Might begins to speak about how good Azuku did. Actually so good that he broke every record, and that he is the #1 student in the entrance exam. And not only that, well, he thought about what he said, about what Azuku said. There truly is a really good chance that Azuku Midoriya, and All Might points toward basically the camera, that Azuku Midoriya can be the #1 hero right when he gets out of high school. Azuku has shown the potential of basically pro hero level power. And as he grows throughout UA, well, he'll continue to show that potential. All Might gives a thumbs up and tells Azuku that when he's ready, UA is waiting, and the hologram closes. Azuku looks toward his mother, and his mother smiles at him, and a smile begins to grow on his face. This truly is the next step, and well, the journey is finally about to begin for Azuku Midoriya to become the #1 hero. Azuku Midoriya has finally gone into UA. UA, the home of the future heroes. He then approaches the school and gets ready for his first day, and as he walks in, nobody even looks at him. It seems like weird. Well, let's just be honest. UA is gonna be full of people that look different, look odd, and have strange powers. So what's the point of making fun of a guy that's bulky and green? Of course, don't forget, Azuku is pretty shredded. He's been working out like crazy and been training like crazy. And he begins to head into his classroom 1A. He looks at the doorway and sees that it's a giant door. Of course, he's pretty tall himself. I mean, like, he's a pretty big dude in terms of his Namekian form, so this does work out for him. Definitely beneficial. He walks into the door to see Bakugo arguing with Tenya Ida. He kind of ignores it and just goes and sits down, and a couple people begin to ask him what his quirk is, especially with the way he looks and stuff like that. Azuku explains that his quirk is kind of odd, a Namekian quirk that involves strength enhancement, regeneration, and a couple other things. And really, that's about it. Of course, he has this powers of using ki, which some people do question him about, because of course they do know about it, and Azuku just explains here and there what it is. They then ask him if he was born like this, if he always looked like this, and Bakugo kind of laughs, saying that of course he was, he's always looked like a green loser. And Azuku, ignoring him, not really even paying attention, says that no, he has another form, and well, it looks just like them, like a regular human, but he's been in this form for a while. Frankly, this is kind of the form he knows best nowadays, especially after how long he's, well, stayed in it, because, well, he felt like this was the best way of going about it. This is his true self, his true power, and he felt that embodying his quirk would be the most beneficial thing he could possibly do. And everybody hearing this is not only shocked, but pretty impressed. And just as they're impressed, Aizawa walks in, telling them to stop gushing over their classmates, tells them all to sit down. He does compliment Azuku, saying that that is the best course of action when you are dealt this type of, well, this type of deck. Azuku thanks him, and Aizawa just nods his head, telling them all that they're going to be doing something. They're all going to be taking a bit of a test. Everybody's like shocked that they're going to be taking a test, but of course he begins to explain that it's more than just some regular old test. What it is exactly is a quirk assessment. So he tells all of them to get on their PE outfits and head outside. When they all arrive outside, and obviously in their PE outfits, Aizawa then asks Azuku to step up first to throw this baseball as far as possible. He does just that, throwing it with all his might, and he launches that thing 2,000, maybe even 3,000 meters. In raw strength, Azuku is extremely powerful. I mean, we've seen it. He was able to punch the zero-pointer so hard that it staggered backwards. He was able to punch holes through robot after robot, varying from the 1 to the 3-point robot. And what else can he do? He's never seen his true limitations, so he might be able to even do even crazier things. Nonetheless, everyone is impressed and begins to say that this is going to be so fun. But just as this is said, let's just say, well, Aizawa flips the script, saying that whoever gets last place is going to be expelled. Everybody hearing this is shocked, scared, but some of the other students that aren't really scared at all, or more powerful students, begin to think of this as a pretty good challenge nonetheless. Some of them don't believe they'll even get close to the bottom, so let's be honest, it doesn't matter that much. But still, at the end of the day, they're going to give it their 100%. Azuku does just that, Bakugo does, Todoroki and many others give it their entire being to basically push themselves to show what they can do in this quirk assessment. And of course, Azuku ends up on top. Let's not get it twisted. Azuku is extremely powerful. He would most likely shatter the grip strength and anything strength related he'd destroy. And on top of that, he's extremely fast, sidestepping races. He can literally fly. It would be unconscionable to think that Azuku wouldn't destroy almost everybody in every category. So Azuku would be number one hands down, but after all of it is said and done, Aizawa would announce that Hagakure, the invisible girl, is actually the one at the very last place. Of course, he said that he basically lied to make sure everybody tried their hardest, in which Momo Yaoyorozu says that wasn't that just already obvious in the first place, but of course to them it really wasn't. Azuku would then basically listen to Aizawa for a little bit longer and get ready to be dismissed entirely. Azuku is then pointed at by Aizawa, and Aizawa wants to know basically how good he can do without his quirk active. Azuku's confused, asking why would it matter? But Aizawa says that he's had his quirk active for a long time. And just as Aizawa looks at him activating his quirk, the green from Azuku's skin begins to change back to its normal color, and he actually stays the same height, but the muscles and the strength and basically all the muscle tone that he's built over this entirety of this time stays exactly the same. So let's just say it's a growner, or basically a grown-up looking Azuku with a lot more muscles and a lot stronger in that regular form. Aizawa smirks slightly and nods, saying that this is kind of what he thought. That his quirk must have basically mended with himself so easily that now it's kind of mimicking the way his other body is as well, just without the extra, long ears, antennae, and also the green skin. And of course Azuku is shocked to see this, and Aizawa deactivates his quirk. Azuku then can feel that he can reactivate and activate his Namekian form whenever he wants, but feels that he's betraying himself if he doesn't stay in that Namekian form. He begins to tell Aizawa this, saying that this is just how he feels about these things, and Aizawa says that's fine. He just wanted to make sure that basically he felt okay with being in that green form the entirety of the time, because at the end of the day, there are going to be people that are going to be terrified of him. There are going to be people that believe that he looks like a villain, an evil person. And Azuku says that he's fine with that, going back into his Namekian form, and he's actually slightly different now, taking on a different bit of a body shape, not as bulky, but still pretty lean and muscular. Of course, Azuku would basically have that same Namekian style that he already had before, but he would look slightly different. Azuku can feel that his strength did not deplete at all, but now he's slightly more nimble. Maybe it was a good idea to switch out of the form at that moment, because his body was getting a little more stocky, if you could say. Nonetheless, everybody would eventually be dismissed, and that day, the first day of UA, would come to a close. After some more time would pass, about a day of course, Azuku would go home, come back to UA after basically spending the night at his house, going to sleep, and when he would arrive at UA, the class would be told by Aizawa what they were going to get into next. Hero training. The first bit of training they're actually and finally going to get. Azuku has been super psyched about this, and he's super excited what to hear about what they're going to be doing. And when he hears that it's going to be heroes versus villains training with All Might himself, Azuku gets super excited. All Might would come barreling through the door, telling them that he is here. And now it's all time for them to head out and basically go do some heroes versus villains training. When they all head out, they're all separated, or after, of course, they get their hero outfits, they're all separated into small groups and told who is going against who. It's going to be 2v2s, heroes versus villains. The hero team will be Azuku Midoriya and Ochako Uraraka versus Katsuki Bakugo and Tenya Ida. Of course, hero team would have to go seize the bomb or capture both villains and seize the bomb. Nonetheless, as long as they touch the bomb, the whole thing is over. Azuku would then sit with Ochako as Bakugo and Tenya will go up and defend that said bomb. Bakugo mocking toward Azuku, saying that their fight will be glorious, but Azuku will be a pile of green mud. Azuku just ignores Bakugo and tells Ochako that he has a plan, that they could just go straight up to the window where that bomb is, destroy the window, and just hit it with a quick little touch. Ochako thinks this is a great idea. I mean, of course it's simplistic, quick, and just anything, or just quick and easy, and they won't have to worry about a thing. So that's exactly what they're going to do. The 5 minutes are up, or the 5 minutes that they were given, and All Might tells them that they are allowed to go. He then grabs Ochako, flying upwards, and as they find the bomb, he shatters the window, and Ochako jumps and grabs the bomb. Just as they do this, Bakugo is pissed, hearing what just happened, and he comes flying back into the room with the bomb in it. Azuku, not really paying attention at all, is about to get exploded in the face by Bakugo, but Azuku just slides out of the way. But that explosion would hit Tenya Ida, sending him outside the window. Just as this happens though, Azuku would jump out, grabbing Tenya before he can hit the ground and flying him back to All Might. He puts him on the ground, and All Might would immediately tell him to get him to Recovery Girl, but just as Azuku is picking him back up, he can feel something in his hands, then his fingertips. He puts his hands on Tenya Ida, or on the chest of Tenya, and immediately this aura begins to glow more and more and more. Out of nowhere, the wounds on his body are completely gone, and he just stands up as if he was completely regenerated. He's completely fine. Azuku looks at his hands and is in complete shock. How did he do that? He's not quite sure. Maybe the Namekian knowledge of that occurrence will eventually come to him, but how is that even possible? Is that even a thing he can really do? Azuku, realizing this, thinking that maybe this healing factor is perfect. He can be the perfect hero. This is amazing. All Might, of course, is completely shocked about what just occurred and asks if Azuku even knows. But Azuku, of course, says he doesn't. He has no idea, but maybe one day and maybe soon he'll figure it out, because this is definitely something you need to figure out. Nonetheless, All Might basically has him take Tenya over to Recovery Girl just in case that anything else went wrong. But yeah, Tenya was completely fine, and Bakugo would be reprimanded slightly, nothing crazy, because I mean, Bakugo has done far worse and nothing has happened to him. But nonetheless, he does get slightly reprimanded. Azuku and, well, the rest of his class would watch on as each match would go on. They would see as Shoto Todoroki would display this crazy ice power, and they would see various other people display different versions of different powers and different strategies, and so on and so forth. After all of the training is said and done, Azuku and his class would be sent off and dismissed, and Azuku would head home after the second, or the whatever day of that next day of UA would be concluded. Azuku, of course, would then arrive back at a brand new day of UA, and with a brand new day becomes a brand new way of training, and that brand new way of training would be, of course, the rescue training. Rescue training is something that Azuku believes he can be very, very, very good at. He has all of the aspects for it. Well, now he has healing, which still doesn't know how he did 100%, but he has stretchy limbs. He can grab people out of big caverns, and frankly, there's a lot of things that Azuku can do with his powers that are built for rescue more than anything else. With that said, Aizawa explains everyone the situation and what they're going to be doing, and they all head off to the bus. During their little bus ride, of course, they do speak about who they believe has the strongest quirk, and frankly, it's kind of a landslide with Azuku. Azuku's quirk is so versatile, or at least what they know as a quirk is so versatile, that it's practically unbeatable. He's extremely powerful, super fast, super durable, can heal people. There's just a bunch of things that Azuku can do that is just overarching almost everything in front of him, everybody around him. It's just he outclasses them all. And of course, Bakugo gets pretty mad about this, but it's hard to dispute what Azuku can do, and they've kind of seen it firsthand and have heard about what's going on, and they've seen it in the practical exam of the UA entrance exam. So there's just a lot that Azuku can do that, frankly, a lot of them just cannot. When they arrive at the rescue, or the USJ, or the rescue training facility, they begin to get introduced to Pro Hero 13. Pro Hero 13 begins to explain exactly what they're going to be doing, different rescue exercises, and various other rescue facilities that they're going to be visiting in terms of it could be a water situation, a cliff, a landslide, a collapsed building, stuff like that. Just as these things are being said, Azuku's head begins to just kind of twitch slightly, and he begins to look around and begins to sense something toward the middle of the USJ. And that's exactly where the fountain is. And immediately this portal begins to open up. Azuku immediately points it out toward Aizawa, telling Aizawa that there must be some people with ill intent coming. Aizawa asks Kaminari immediately if he can basically communicate with anybody on the outside, and of course not. They're being blocked off. Before they even knew it, Aizawa would be jumping into action, fending off these so-called villains. But not only that, a warp portal would absorb a bunch of them and throw them off into a different area of the USJ. Azuku would be in this little water area, but he wouldn't even fall into the water, flying up and then flying toward this small boat. He would see Asui and also Mineta, and Mineta would be freaking out, and Azuku immediately tell him to stop messing around and not to worry. He grabs him and Asui and begins to fly off as he shoots a ki blast toward the villains below them. He tells Mineta to throw a bunch of his sticky balls toward those villains so they can get captured away, and that's exactly what happens. Asui and Mineta both say that they're happy that Azuku was there because it made this little situation, let's just say, a lot easier. Azuku slightly smiles and says that it's really no problem. I mean, of course it's the luck of the draw, but it doesn't really matter. He flies over back toward where it's at least relatively safe, dropping both of them off. But he sees as Aizawa is beginning to basically just cut out a bunch of these lower tier villains. Azuku would begin to fly over there as he sees a giant monster about to smash into Aizawa's face. Immediately, Azuku steps in front of Aizawa, taking the blow. And when he takes this blow, he can feel the massive strength behind it. But Azuku does not budge an inch. He begins to ground his feet as much as possible, and he begins to push back this monster that they know as a Nomu. Immediately, Shigaraki sees this and begins to panic, telling Kurogiri that they need to do something now. A portal opens up right in front of Shigaraki as he throws his hand through it, grabbing the arm of Azuku, immediately disintegrating the arm off of Azuku as he's forced to go backwards, getting away from the Nomu and also getting away from Shigaraki. Azuku immediately looks toward Aizawa and asks if he's okay. Aizawa doesn't even know what to say. This kid, his arm is gone. I mean, what are you asking me if I'm okay about? And of course, Azuku would look at him and then look at his arm as he stretches that limb out and it regenerates back instantaneously. Azuku says that he's fine and that they need to go back into the battle right now, or basically everybody else is going to get hurt. Azuku goes charging back at the Nomu, and immediately when Shigaraki puts his hand through the portal once again, Azuku reads it this time. He immediately puts a ki blast right on the hand of Shigaraki, burning it extremely bad, and he counters immediately after by grabbing Shigaraki's arm, pulling him through the portal, forcing him through because if the portal was closed, he would get cut in half. Shigaraki would then get thrown at a wall as Azuku is charging back at the Nomu. Both Azuku and the Nomu begin to go blow for blow. Of course, Azuku actually at this point can't do any substantial damage to the Nomu, but he can damn well take damage, and that's for sure. His endurance, his strength, his durability at that is at another level. So he begins to take these blows from the Nomu as if it were nothing. Azuku going blow for blow with this Nomu, and it would eventually lead to the one and only All Might arriving. All Might would then charge toward the Nomu, smashing into it. All Might would look toward Azuku and ask if, well, that little trick he did on the giant robot, if they can do that now. Azuku is shocked to realize that All Might was watching him while he did that, and Azuku smiles, saying that yeah, he can, just give him time to charge it up. All Might says that that's what he'll get as Aizawa stands up and says that he'll protect him from Shigaraki and Kurogiri if need be. Immediately Azuku begins to charge it up. The one attack that's basically he used on the giant monster, Light Grenade. That's the goal. He's charging it up, and even the area around them begins to shake, tremor. The floor beneath Azuku begins to break and get destroyed. Azuku would then eventually, after about maybe 30 seconds to a minute, would scream out toward All Might that he's ready. All Might would grab the Nomu and take a blow to the gut, nonetheless throwing the Nomu toward Azuku as Azuku says two words once again, as if he was mimicking himself from the entrance exam. Light Grenade. He smashes the Light Grenade into the Nomu as it begins to incinerate the Nomu's body, sending him flying out of the USJ. And of course, they don't really know if the Nomu is dead or not, but at least it took insane damage and it flew straight out of here. Shigaraki and Kurogiri realize that this fight, well, it's kind of over. So they're forced to retreat, but just as they're retreating, Shigaraki gets shot in the leg, the arm, and in the other leg. Immediately they're able to leave, but not without any wounds. Azuku is panting, but doesn't feel too tired compared to what he was way back, or not even way back, but back in the entrance exam. He feels pretty good. He feels like he's able to do one more Light Grenade if need be, but he does kind of want to expand his arsenal in terms of key techniques if he really wants to be more efficient with this type of, well, brawling style. Nonetheless, everybody is safe, and Azuku is basically told to not tell anybody about this little fight, and not to tell anybody that he straight up blew up this creature that looks like a giant bird. Azuku agrees and says that definitely would not be a good look that a student tried to, well, murder a bird-like creature, but nonetheless, everyone is safe and that's all that matters. So, that's exactly what occurs. They head off and they begin, or obviously they're all taken out of the USJ and they are all given a day off. Of course, the USJ incident is a pretty interesting and terrifying incident at that. So nobody's going to want to go into class the day or the next day. So of course they're given that time off. But when they do go into class, they are told about, well, what's going to happen and what's going to occur very, very soon. And that is the UA Sports Festival. The UA Sports Festival is a way for all of them to show off what they can do. Of course, Azuku and everybody else that is extremely powerful and strong are excited. Class 1A is excited, and frankly they get to show off their stuff and maybe even get into a really good internship that they really want to get into, and this is just perfect for them all. Azuku, of course, begins to think about all of the things he could go and do if he gets into a good internship. Who could he go with? Mirako would be perfect for him. Maybe Sir Night-Eye. He doesn't know. Maybe someone like Gang Orca or someone that is really good with martial arts. That's all he really cares about. And he just keeps thinking about these things. And of course, he would have to, show out in the UA Sports Festival first. But of course, he will do just that. On top of that, he even has a little speech. On the day of the UA Sports Festival, Azuku Midoriya will be called to the podium. And he walks up and begins to greet everybody. he begins to say that he's gone through a lot throughout his life, especially because of the way he looks. But this is the first time that he'll be able to show everybody that it doesn't really matter how he looks, it just matters how strong he is, how much he wants to save people, and how powerful and what powers are going to allow him to do that. He's going to show off his skills and basically show off everything that he can do. He smiles and then transforms back into his human form and says that he is just like everybody else, and that he just looks a little bit different when he transforms. He transforms back into his Namekian form, and everybody is basically shocked, but at the same time begins to clap and basically get excited for a prospect like Azuku. Azuku then smiles and tells everyone that they're going to give them one heck of a show, and he runs back toward his class. Of course, the first event would be simple: the obstacle course race. The obstacle course race is a pretty basic race, of course, and well, it all comes down to just going through a variety of obstacles. A giant corridor, a bunch of robots, a ravine, a landmine field, and frankly, it's pretty simple and simple enough. And Azuku would make quick work of this once Midnight would give her little countdown. She would give the countdown and everybody would begin running through the corridor, but Azuku, using his ki, would just fly. He'd shoot off as fast as possible, flying by the corridor, flying by the robots, flying by the ravine, and of course not even touching the ground in the minefield, and he would end with relative ease in a matter of, well, probably about a minute. Azuku would literally just wait. Like, he would just wait for everybody to finish. And of course, after a good bit of waiting, everybody would. But it would be deemed, after all of it is said and done, that Azuku would get a 1 million point headband. And of course, this would mean that in this cavalry battle where points is all that matters, a 1 million point headband would win you the match. But at the same time, Azuku would also be a primary target. So Azuku would try to assemble the best team possible, and frankly, it would end up only being able to get people like Mei Hatsume, Ochaku Oraka, Tokiyami, and that's about it. Unfortunately, everybody else squirmed off, was scared, and didn't want to be with Azuku. So they came up with this amazing plan. This plan was perfect. It was unbeatable. And just as the cavalry's battle started, Azuku, flew straight up. Yeah, they're gonna be chilling in the air with 1 million points. And frankly, Bakugo could try, and he would eventually try, but he would get blasted out of the sky pretty easily, and this process would be pretty, let's say not difficult at all. Azuku would make it so him and the rest of his team would pass very easily, and they would get on to the next round. And frankly, everybody that would get onto the next round normally would get onto the next round. And the next round is something that Azuku has been looking forward to, and that is the 1 versus 1s. This is finally a chance for Azuku to stretch his legs, feel out an opponent, and get some use of his martial arts. In terms of the Nomu fight, it was kind of just brute strength. In terms of the Shigaraki whole, thing of him putting his hand through the portal, that was kind of just outsmarting him. And frankly, he hasn't gotten a chance to really box someone up or even fight. And he hasn't been to his martial arts classes in a long time. Those dojos are kind of just out of the realm of what he needs to be doing at this moment. So he thinks this is a great opportunity, and he'll be able to show it off against Hitoshi Shinso, someone from the general studies. And this fight will go a little bit different than you could possibly imagine, because Hitoshi Shinso has something up his sleeve, a special quirk, skill, one known as brainwashing. Will Azuku fall short and be hypnotized by Shinso's voice, or will Azuku just steamroll over Shinso with his superior martial arts? Well, you're gonna have to find out next time Azuku Midoriya is called to the stage with Hitoshi Shinso, a one-on-one matchup between someone at the very top of the hero school of 1A and someone, well, just in the general studies. Azuku begins to walk up to the stage and gets ready for the fight. The countdown begins, and immediately Hitoshi Shinso begins to say some foul words, calling him basically any nickname in the book that would sound horrible, saying that he's gifted, saying that he's ugly, saying anything you can even think of, he's telling Azuku. Azuku walks forward and then replies. His body would go immediately under some sort of trance. All he would see is just black. He would look around and see absolutely nothing. And as he's staring into the void of darkness, unbeknownst to him, he's actually walking off the stage. Azuku is looking at this darkness while this is occurring, and he's squinting his eyes, trying to see what's going on. As he looks closer and closer, he sees a green figure, one that looks very similar to him. He walks closer, and that figure's aura erupts, but it's different. It's a different type of aura and a different type of feeling. The power of this person is insane. An emblem would grow on the back of that said Namekian or that said person, and they would fly away in a matter of seconds. Azuku is shocked to see this and can feel that the power with that Namekian was far different than he's ever even felt within himself. Just as Azuku turns around though, he hears the roar of a dragon. As a green dragon, swoops down and flies straight at him, and in a matter of seconds, Azuku is awake. He sees himself right at the edge of basically the stage. Azuku immediately turns, stretching out his arm, grabbing Shinso and throwing him off. Realizing the martial arts fight that he wanted, he almost threw it away by just getting lured into a trap. He didn't realize how unique some of these quirks could really be. Azuku would then continue to wait for his next match, but would just think about what he saw. The power that Namekian showed, what was it? And the dragon that swooped down in front of him. He needs to know more, he wants to know more, but nothing's coming to him and nothing can even be heard within his own head. He can't even think. There's nothing that he can even think of that would even basically justify anything he just saw. Nonetheless though, he would continue trying to figure it out, but his next match would then come about. His next match would be against Shoto Todoroki. When he steps out on that stage though, Shoto basically seems cocky, arrogant, and flat out ready to get this over and done with. And that's exactly what he's gonna try to do. Just as the match would begin, ice would get thrown everywhere, covering basically the entirety of this entire stadium. But just as this would occur, the ice would shatter instantaneously with one blinding light. Azuku would just walk towards Shoto as he reaches out an arm, grabbing him and immediately trying to throw him off the stage. But just as he does this, his arm would get frozen. Azuku would let go and just break off the ice and would tell him that there is no winning in this battle, especially with only using half of his quirk. Shoto refuses to use anything other than his ice, and Azuku says that he doesn't really care in overall scheme of things, but the fact that he thought he could win in general with half of his quirk is kind of ridiculous. Why would he think someone or some place like UA would have so many people that are basically so weak that he would just beat everybody with only using his ice? He begins to tell him that he doesn't understand why he wouldn't use his quirk. I mean, it is his own, correct? Just as he says this, Shoto would disagree, saying that Fireside is his father's. Azuku thinking that this is ridiculous. That's a dumb idea. Like, it's in your body. It's part of you, not part of your father. It doesn't really make sense to Azuku, and he says that he can use that firepower however he would like, but maybe think about basically using everything he possibly has in his arsenal the next time he steps foot on a stage like this. Azuku immediately blitzes Todoroki and is right in front of him in a matter of seconds, pushing him off the stage, and the fight is over. Azuku tells him that maybe next time they can actually have a good fight, but he highly doubts it if he's going to let his own ego and basically the whole revolting side of him overcloud his actual judgment. Azuku would then leave, and obviously Endeavor would be pretty pissed off. Nonetheless though, Azuku would await on his next match, which would be Tenya Ida, but he's shown that he would far class out Tenya, that frankly he wouldn't be fast enough, and Azuku is far stronger than him, so it doesn't really matter. Azuku would easily speed blitz him, get him out of the stage, or knock him out entirely, and well, the last Namekian is going to be in the very final round. That final round would end up being Azuku versus Bakugo. This is one fantastic match. Azuku happy that it's occurring, and Bakugo is as well. He's been training. Bakugo has been training like crazy, trying to get to the point where he can outclass Azuku, and he wants to give it a full shot. At the start of the match, Bakugo goes barreling forward toward Azuku, and trying to basically just explode any part of his body he possibly can. Smoke begins to just overwhelm the entirety of the stadium. The rubble, the wreckage, everything begins to get scattered everywhere. Bakugo continues his assault on Azuku, but let's just say, it doesn't go as well as he thought it would. He looks up to see that the smoke is finally clearing, but Azuku is not there. There's nothing there. Azuku is standing behind Bakugo with a slight smirk on his face. He punches him toward the edge of the ring and tells him that it's time for him to just give up. He's not as strong as Azuku, and frankly, he has no means of getting as strong. On top of that, Azuku has taken years of training seriously and has tried to hone his power as much as possible. What has Bakugo really done? Of course, Bakugo realized the strength of Azuku and then started training harder and harder, but it's a little too late. Azuku then tells Bakugo that no matter how much he trains, he will never catch up, because Azuku, or himself, will never stop training. That's the goal for Azuku, to be the strongest, to be the #1 hero, to be like All Might. No, be better than All Might. That's what Azuku wants. He wants the #1 hero to be Azuku Midoriya, but he wants to be even better than All Might. He then looks toward Bakugo, sending a ki blast toward his chest, knocking him straight out of the ring, making it basically look like child's play. With the UA Sports Festival finally finished, everybody begins to celebrate, especially seeing Azuku being the one standing on top of the throne. He would be getting the first place, Bakugo second, and whoever else would get third. Frankly, who cares? Nonetheless, Azuku would be taking the #1 place, and Bakugo, well, let's just say he wouldn't be mad like normal. He would just realize something, that he needs to work harder. He needs to prove to Azuku, to himself, that what he said, or what Azuku said, was incorrect. That he can catch up. He can be as strong. No, he can be stronger. This, of course, would give Bakugo more incentive, but will he really be able to catch up? Well, probably not. But hey, it's a good thought by Bakugo. With that said, the sports festival is over. Everybody heads off and is dismissed entirely, and the next day they get an announcement about the internships. Aizawa explains to his class 1A, exactly what's going to happen, showing a screen of who got the most internships, or at least offers. Azuku getting about the same amount of offers as Shoto Todoroki, someone that has a parent as the #2 hero. Well, with that said though, Azuku would begin to look through his entire repertoire of people he can choose from, and eventually he'd find the person. Referencing where he wanted to go already a while back, he chooses Mirko, the rabbit hero. He feels that's really the only person that can actually teach him something. Maybe these other pro heroes could teach him something, but he feels in terms of martial arts and basically utilizing his entire body, Mirko would be the best way of going about it. She is one of just straight up training and action, so he definitely wants to take her up on that offer. And that's exactly what he does. After some time would pass, Azuku would head off to the agency, or basically where Mirko currently is. Mirko would then begin to greet Azuku and bring him inside. They would then begin their training, and frankly, this entire internship is purely and surely just training. They just straight up spar, and that's practically it. And before or after a couple of days, she does decide that maybe they should go on a bit of a patrol nearby, but during this patrol, he doesn't really see much. Nothing is really found out, and frankly, he doesn't really know if there's any major villains around basically the neighborhood that Mirko is stationed at currently. And she says that there really isn't. There's not that many, but of course there are a couple here and there in which they do take down, but it's nothing crazy. But just as this is all occurring, Mirko gets a bit of a ring in her pocket. She checks it out and begins to answer, hearing some very bad news. Tenya Ida. Well, Tenya Ida has been killed, in Hosu City. Some bad things went down in Hosu without Azuku even knowing, and, let's just say someone got fatally injured. He's on death's door. They basically deemed him to be dead already because he's practically on life support. If he comes off of it, he'll just die. But Azuku would be called in back to UA, and they would question him about the power that he showed earlier, or at least in the Heroes vs. Villains training. Azuku says that he could try to heal Tenya, and, from what he hears about it, his brother is also substantially hurt. If it works for Tenya, it should work for his brother. He'll try to do both and see what happens. Azuku would head over to that said hospital, and his family, or obviously Tenya Ida's family, would be around, sitting there staring at the bed that their child is currently completely just out of it on, in a comatose-like state. Azuku would walk over and put his hands over the boy. Everybody would be confused at what he's doing as this aura begins to appear around Tenya. They begin to scream at the tall, large man, of course, realizing that Azuku is in a Namekian form. He's huge. I mean, come on. He begins to heal Tenya. He begins to heal him entirely, and he wakes up. Not a scratch on him. Azuku then turns and asks where their other son is, and in complete shock, the mother of Tenya Ida would grab him by the arm and run him off to the other room of their other son. He heals him up entirely as well, and they have a bit of a nice family reunion. Azuku would then head back to UA and ask them if he could continue training with Mirko, and that he's just learning some new things, and that basically his strength seems to be accelerating massively because of this training. But unfortunately, Aizawa will have to shut the idea down, telling him that on regard of UA and the fatal injuries, even though Azuku healed them, he can't let them go back on internships, and unfortunately, they kind of have to cut him short. Azuku finds this kind of sad, but Mirko would send him a letter telling him that they will reconvene one more time, and next time they'll have a lot more time to actually, train and do stuff. You gotta realize it's only been a couple days. It hasn't been, like a whole week or 2 weeks for them to actually really understand and learn from each other. Nonetheless, though, Azuku would then be back in class, and everybody would look at him like he's some white mage, and everybody knows you never F with the white mage. You guys know what I'm saying? Okay, Azuku would be looked at as this person that can basically save anybody. It makes people feel invincible, immortal. They're not sure, but they also feel the need to basically be best friends with Azuku. Azuku makes this abundantly clear that there are no best friends. They don't need to be nice to him. He's doing this because this is what a hero should do. And of course, if they are really injured, he will help them, save them. But you have to realize that heroes will sacrifice and basically draw that line all the time. So there really isn't a way around death if you are throwing your life in harm's way all the time. And Azuku does remind them though that he's here for them and for himself, for the teachers, and the teachers are same way back for them. Of course, that's just how it is, and that's how a hero should be. Aizawa kind of lets him talk for a little bit, and then eventually cuts in, saying that they do have some things to attend to, being that of the final exam. They have a written and they have a practical portion, and he tells them to be ready because they need to study and get ready for all of it. Azuku would actually study and help many others study as well, because frankly, this dude is intelligent as heck. I mean, of course he is. He's just learning at a rapid rate, and also the fact that he has all the wisdom, or at least most of the wisdom, of the Namekian clan, or of all the Namekian clans. So Azuku would be extremely smart, and he would put that to good use for the written portion of the exam. Of course, he would ace it with freaking flying colors like it was nothing, so that wouldn't be really a problem. But the next issue would be something, well, a little bit more interesting. The practical exam. The practical exam is something he's been looking forward to, assuming, and of course he was assuming, that it's not going to be like the robots thing anymore. He thinks it's kind of stupid to keep it as a robot thing, but hey, maybe it is, maybe it's not. And he would soon realize that it's not a robot thing, so that is a good thing in his book. Nonetheless though, a bunch of the teachers would arrive at the gym and they would all be listening for instructions. Aizawa begins to basically explain to everybody what's going to happen, giving everybody their teacher that they're going to have to face. But this time around, Bakugo goes against another teacher, not All Might, because All Might feels and wants to see the limitations of this so-called Namekian. Azuku Midoriya is gonna go one-on-one with the one and only number one hero, All Might. All Might is basically telling him to basically let loose, don't hold back at all. He wants to see how strong Azuku truly has gotten, especially with the fact that he's shown so much promise in almost every single regard. He outclasses his, well, class. So the fact is, well, he needs to show everybody how strong he currently is in terms of the pro level ceiling. And that's what exactly he's going to do. Azuku will watch on as his other classmates do their test, fight the other teachers, so on and so forth. But once it comes to his turn, everybody is watching with so much interest. Of course, it's a spectacle. Everybody's sitting there arguing. Is he going to be able to beat All Might? I mean, yeah, it's a slightly restricted All Might, but it's still All Might, right? And some others think that maybe he's gotten even stronger. Maybe Azuku has transcended his limits that they've already seen. He said himself that he trained with Mirako and has learned things that he's never even thought of. Maybe that's in terms of raw power, maybe that's in terms of technique. He's not, or everyone's not so sure. So when both All Might and Azuku enter the battlefield, they are watching very, very closely. Azuku immediately goes flying toward All Might, seeing exactly where All Might is. Immediately, All Might shoots shock waves of wind toward Azuku, but Azuku flies in, dodging each one. Just as he gets to All Might throws a Detroit Smash right at him. Just as he does this though, wind begins to pick up and dust just covers the entire area with that one foul swoop, that one punch. But when the dust clears, Azuku is holding the punch of All Might, grabbing him by the arm and flipping him, slamming him on his back. He immediately gets back up, but Azuku kicks him right in the stomach and proceeds to get to work. All Might may be strong, maybe even physically stronger than Azuku at this point. Well, he's not so sure, but even if he is, in terms of raw technique, All Might isn't even close. All Might begins to just get pieced up, getting punched in the stomach, to the face, head kick, anything you can think of, every technique, every martial arts, and basically all the levels of martial arts is showing right now with Azuku. Azuku is dismantling the symbol of peace as if it were a joke. Azuku would then wrap his arm around, well, All Might, wrapping him entirely and throwing him toward a building. Azuku would then fly back toward All Might and would continue fighting him. All Might giving it his complete all, and he's just in complete shock about how strong Azuku currently is. And it seems like he's only getting better. He's only getting stronger. Azuku continues doing this over and over, fighting All Might, beating him down. But All Might obviously is able to take these blows. In terms of physical capabilities, Azuku really, well, hasn't grown a ton in terms of physical strength. In terms of key manipulation and basically using it within one's body, he's still trying to figure out how to enhance his strength via this. But his durability is on a whole different level. Not a scratch is on him from every punch he's even taken from All Might, and frankly, those are far and few between. All Might can't even touch him. All Might would then get thrown toward the gate, basically where Azuku would need to go. He begins to fly over toward All Might, but he just walks through the said gate. He walks back to All Might, and he sees that All Might seemingly is struggling to stay in this grown or basically flexing like form. It reminds Azuku of like bald bodybuilders when they flex really hard and they're trying to keep that form. But All Might isn't a bodybuilder. He doesn't know. He's so confused. He's not sure, but he tells All Might immediately to relax. He walks over and he puts both of his hands on All Might's chest and immediately begins to heal All Might. But out of nowhere, Azuku could tell there was something else right there that he didn't even realize. There was a whole, well, like a horrible thing on his stomach, or whatever that was, but he healed it entirely. Azuku feels a little bit drained from using this technique, but he looks at All Might in confusion and asks him something in a weird coded way. Not saying exactly what he means because he doesn't want to be heard by anyone else or questioned about it. And he looks toward All Might's kind of ribcage area. All Might nods and tells him that he will explain everything very soon. Aizawa would then group up the class once again, telling everybody that they will be going to the forest training camp no matter what, even though some people didn't necessarily pass. But still, they all will go, but they will just have to take extra classes. Of course, Azuku passed. I mean, it's not even close. But Azuku would then be taken out of class to speak with All Might. All Might would tell Azuku exactly what occurred, how he got the injury, what his power is, and he feels that he can trust Azuku. Especially, seemingly, Azuku could be that next person in line to take that #1 spot. All Might believed that whoever he gave his power to would be the person, but he's not so sure anymore. He knows this person basically is really strong, the one he gave it to, but I mean, it could mean that it could mean nothing. Azuku could be the strongest at the end of it. Azuku does ask a couple questions about One for All, asking about basically how it works and different things like that. But he says that it's for the best that Azuku doesn't have it anyways. There's a good chance that he won't become the symbol of peace. He'd be more like the symbol of peace beyond the scenes, because he is a scary monster, and he dignifies that, believing that this is a popularity contest at the end of the day, and there's a reason why Endeavor was always #2. I mean, Endeavor was never really that smiley figure that All Might was. Endeavor was really strong, and maybe the strength alone kept All Might ahead, but there was no catching up. Endeavor would never catch up to All Might. That's just a fact, unless All Might left. But All Might does question Azuku about the healing and how he feels so much stronger, And Azuku says that he healed him of all wounds, obviously, and obviously now he knows what happened in terms of the injury, and he says that he should be at tip-top shape, but knowing that All Might gave away his power, maybe he's not quite at tip-top. And obviously All Might understands this, and Azuku does lead off with one last question. Who did he give One for All to? All Might would think about maybe he shouldn't tell the kid, but he decides to do so. He tells him that Mirio Togata, basically this young man that is a third year and one of the big three. Azuku nods and says that he assumes he's very strong. He will be seeing him pretty soon and would love to get to know him and basically get some sparring time in. And All Might says that would be a great idea, and it will totally recommend that to him after they are done with their little forest training camp. Azuku asks if All Might will be going, but he says no, that's basically not his, he shouldn't be going because, well, there's been villain attacks and stuff like that. Azuku understands and leaves off to the rest of his class. Aizawa dismisses everybody, and they head back home one last night before their forest training camp. When Azuku and his class the next day head off onto the buses and begin to drive off, they begin to speak about basically everything that happened. Azuku just beat All Might. Does that mean Azuku is the symbol of peace? Like, how does that even work? Azuku kind of laughs at this and says that a giant green monster cannot be the symbol of peace, and to not worry about that, or at least not worry too much about it. Nonetheless, though, Azuku would make it clear that his goal is to be the #1 hero, but someone like him may have to settle for just being the strongest, but he'll have to see in the near future. After some conversation, they would eventually stopping by a nearby cliff of some sorts. That cliff, and where they are, is where the Wild Pussycats are currently at. Azuku would walk over, listen to a bit of a speech, and it'd be pretty apparent that they're about to get launched off this cliff by one of the Wild Pussycats. The ground begins to shake, tear, and get destroyed, launching everybody off, well, except for Azuku. Azuku kind of stood there, and the cliff kind of broke in between him, but that's beyond the point. Aizawa looks at him and just shakes his head, slightly smiling, telling them all that this kid is the real deal. Immediately they question, kid? He's like 6'5". How is he a kid? And Aizawa shrugs and asks Azuku if he wants to go back to his regular form just for a quick second. Azuku does, and the Wild Pussycats are completely shocked. Aizawa explains that the kid decided to stay in this form, or in his Namekian form he calls it, because it's more efficient that way. He learns better, learns faster, becomes stronger a lot quicker, and, well, his abilities seem to be limitless, from just raw strength, durability, to even a healing power. And, of course, the Wild Pussycats question if it's a healing factor, or like he can basically heal himself, or he has regeneration, and Aizawa just says, yes, all of it. He has all of it. In which the Wild Pussycats are completely shocked, and Aizawa asks Azuku to hop off the cliff to basically go help his classmates out. Azuku tells him he got it, and he flies down, in which the Wild Pussycats are also shocked at the fact that this kid can literally fly. Well, yeah. Of course, I feel like this would be everyone's reaction when some UA student that's a first year is a giant green monster that can probably like level a whole forest, at least at this point. With that said though, their training obviously would finally begin. Getting through the forest relatively quickly though with the help of Azuku. Even Azuku decided to actually try out a couple new abilities, and he actually spread his ki out with a couple people to see that it actually upped the strength of their abilities. But that was kind of just experimental, and of course that will not stay the same entirely. Frankly, they didn't really notice. They just thought they were just, doing the same old, and they were just getting the last hit on some of these monsters. But that's not the case. With that said though, they would eventually arrive at the train or the forest camp, and it would actually be a lot quicker than usual. And this is when Aizawa would tell them all that it's time to get some food, get cleaned up, because the next day is when the true training begins. That's when everybody is going to truly break their limits and truly break the limits of what their quirks are currently. They don't have time for them to wait for adulthood to develop, because they need them to be as strong as possible right now. And the forest training camp will continue on in the next part of What If Deku Was the Reincarnation of Piccolo. Azuku Midoriya and Class 1A, and many others, obviously, Class 1B included, begin their training in the forest training camp. They begin training every single aspect that they can possibly think of. If you believe in, or obviously if you think in the weaknesses of every single person in Class 1A and Class 1B, Aizawa wants to effectively expose every single weakness. Azuku has his weaknesses, but let's be honest, they're far and few between. Aizawa believed that maybe quirk erasing was his only weakness, but then soon it would come to his attention that Azuku is now immune to that. He doesn't know how it works, and he doesn't know what the heck even occurred, but he doesn't want Azuku to maintain or get rid of his weaknesses, because frankly, he doesn't really have many, or any at all, but he actually wants him to sharpen a couple tools. One being his healing, something that is very, very good in this instance. Healing someone else is something that he could benefit from tenfold. On top of that, what else can he truly know? Aizawa begins to explain to Azuku that he has this so-called Namekian wisdom, is what Azuku explains it as. What else is beyond that wisdom? He needs to truly connect with that side, maybe connect with that so-called memories, that so-called wisdom. He should do some meditation in a nearby place. Pitch black, nothing around, silence. That's the goal for Azuku, and that's exactly what he begins to do. He begins to focus on his healing ability, but also focus on heavy meditation to learn more and more about himself. During this time, he would sit there for hours on end, thinking, wondering, meditating. He would learn so much about the Namekians, about who he was in a past life. During this meditation, Azuku's eyes would be wide open, but not literally. He would see so many things that he wouldn't even imagine to even believe would exist. A giant dragon, one that would sit in front of him as him. No, it's not him, but he begins to utter the words of that said dragon, beginning to ask the dragon to unlock the potential of oneself, to unlock the potential of that said Namekian. Immediately, the dragon says that, of course, that wish can be granted, immediately gifting that said Namekian a different power and leaving immediately. Azuku would wake up in a shock and in a state of not knowing what's going on, but he wouldn't feel any different, barely even remembering what exactly happened. He would fly off as night would then approach, and Aizawa would be glad to see him back already, not wanting to go all the way out there because he was feeling a little bit lazy. Of course, Azuku would then sit with everybody, drink water, eat watermelon, and, well, eat anything that would produce water, so, lettuce. I mean, there's no real reason for him to eat anything else. But at the same time, he would just sit there and listen to everyone speak. After some more time would pass, Azuku would be given the option to actually participate in some sort of test of courage. During this so-called test of courage, everything goes extremely, simple. Seems extremely well. Class 1A and Class 1B, they both have a good bit of fun, and the entirety of the forest training camp goes by relatively quickly with no hiccup at all. Actually, with no intrusion of villains at all. And this would be because there's no reason for them to attack, especially when, they know that Bakugo doesn't have a crazy temper, or at least they don't know he does from obviously the UA Sports Festival. With that said though, they begin to head back on their bus, and when they're driving, they begin to hear the radios turn on automatically, hearing about a fight in the middle of this giant city, and it's between All Might, the League of Villains, and also All for One. Azuku's pretty shocked to hear about this, not knowing what's going on specifically, but just as they're basically thinking about this, their bus goes flipping over, tumbling around because they are actually nearby that said city. Of course, there's Nomu's running rampant. Azuku breaks free out of the bus, making sure everyone's okay. Opening the bus up enough that everybody can leave, Azuku then walks over toward one of the Nomus, grabbing the Nomu by the face and obliterating it in a matter of seconds using ki from his hand. He would then ask Aizawa where they should go next, and he would lead them to a nearby building and then eventually a hidden way out, and they would be able to escape back towards UA. Azuku would watch on a television screen as All Might is fighting the League of Villains on his own, on top of fighting All For One. Now this is something very, very difficult. Yes, All Might is a lot closer to his prime than he's ever been in a long time because Azuku has healed him, but at the same time, he gave up One For All, so he's not as strong as he used to be at that moment of his prime. So in terms of All For One, 1 versus 1 against All Might could handle him relatively easily. But with the League of Villains stacked up against him as well, things become a lot more complicated. Azuku watches on the television and gets visibly frustrated, asking if anybody's going to help him. He might be able to beat them all on his own, but he's going to stretch himself too thin. It's going to basically exert him of the last whispers of One For All. Of course, Azuku doesn't reveal One For All to everybody, but he's frustrated to see that All Might is, well, struggling. All Might would then continue to struggle, and Azuku would watch on, and Aizawa would stare at him, knowing that he has no way of stopping this kid if he decides to go blasting out a window or go blasting out that said door. Just as he begins to think this, there he goes. Azuku blasts through the nearby window, flying at insane speeds toward the location of where All Might currently is. Just as he arrives, he tells All Might to handle the small fry, that he'll take on the big dude for now. Immediately, All Might tells him that's a horrible idea, that wouldn't be necessary, but Azuku tells him not to worry, he has a plan. All Might looks at Azuku wondering if he's actually serious, but Azuku is. He flies slowly toward All For One, and All For One scoffs in the face of Azuku, telling him that Prime All Might, or All Might himself, may be able to take him one-on-one. But this kid, this person, he's no pro hero. They know who he is. He's just part of some UA. He's just some first year. Azuku tells him that he's a smart guy. He's made up a ton of calculations. There's a reason why he kept the League of Villains here to fight with him against All Might, because he knew that it wasn't as simple as beating him on his own anymore, because he knew about Izuku's powers. But how much did he actually know? The life of a Namekian, the wisdom of a Namekian, seems to be limitless. Who tells All For One, or who says that All For One knows every last bit of it? Well, exactly, he doesn't. Azuku then dashes toward him with an aura flaring up that is completely white. Azuku would slam his fist into the stomach of All For One, sending him flying. But at this moment, All For One is able to keep up relatively easily. But Izuku's durability puts him on another level. A cut? That's nothing. A puncture through his stomach isn't even anything at this moment. His durability is insane. There is no way that he can puncture through Azuku. His skin seems to feel like iron. As he begins to fight All For One, they clash over and over again, and All For One doesn't know even what to do. He looks to his right to see All Might basically about to beat the League of Villains. The only reason why they haven't lost yet is because Kurogiri is keeping everybody up, allowing them to move freely. All For One believes that this may be the end. It may be closing in if he can't help the League or his League of Villains. He begins to send tendrils over, but immediately Azuku would grab the tendrils, shattering them into pieces. Immediately, All For One is shocked. How the hell did you do that? How did you do that, kid? Of course, Azuku doesn't say a word though, charging forward, slamming All For One into the ground, creating a large pile of dust. All Might looks over and slightly smirks to see Azuku finally gaining the upper hand. Azuku would then toss All For One up and begins to just shoot a ton of ki blasts toward All For One. Of course, All For One is able to avoid these said ki blasts, dodging in and out, avoiding them as much as possible. But then he would realize he would sit still, fly still. He's levitating, but all of the ki blasts are actually going around him, and All For One asks if he's even trying to hit him. No, I'm not. Azuku says this, and All For One is confused, even remarking, what the hell is that supposed to even mean? He looks around and sees a ton of these spherical key-like orbs, and Azuku raises both of his hands and crosses both of his arms as he says, Hellzone Grenade. Just as he says this, they begin to smash into All For one after another. Yeah, he might not be physically strong at this moment, but he had a technique that he learned through the wisdom of a Namekian. Hellzone Grenade is exactly what it is. He brings on a ton of ki blasts and surrounds his opponent and rains hell. Immediately as the dust begins to settle and disappear, All For One collapses to the ground. Not dead, but severely injured. Azuku looks to his left to see that All For One has already handled the entirety of the League of Villains. Azuku nods toward All Might, but just as he does this, a portal opens up beneath the League of Villains and they disappear in a matter of seconds. All For One was slightly awake and was able to get that last technique off before he completely went to unconsciousness. This would frustrate Azuku, but he would tell All Might and tell the police to take All For One away. And obviously he would get into a ton of trouble for this, but after seeing the League of Villains get away like that, he's frustrated. He knows All Might is drained, and he knows that One For All is depleting entirely away from him at this point. He walks over to All Might and heals him, but he tells him that there is no healing the disconnect between him and One For All. It's not possible. It's time for him to retire from here on out. Azuku makes this very, very clear, and All Might is suspicious about what Azuku is thinking, asking the kid what he has in mind. Azuku tells him that all of this seems odd, that he's able to do this much, but now he's going to be in trouble, destroyed. He's going to be taught a lesson for doing something like this. At the end of the day, yes, they could get him out of it. At the end of the day, they could make sure that all of these cameras are wiped off entirely, and Azuku wouldn't even be known to be the person to do this. But Azuku doesn't care. He realizes something. He realizes that as a Namekian, as himself, he needs something. Freedom? No. Solidarity? He's not sure. Maybe he needs something that leaves him alone. Maybe he needs peace of mind, but at the same time, he feels he can't get that peace of mind within UA. It doesn't make sense. Azuku would then begin to fly off and take off to an unknown location. A location all the way across the world. Azuku would be sitting in a nearby, not really nearby, but a desert, and he would be training, thinking, and also meditating about everything that has happened over this course of time. Azuku wouldn't really know what to expect, but at the same time he would sit there and think. Wisdom is all he wanted from the Namekians. As he begins to think this, he would go into a state of meditation for days, no, weeks, maybe even months. He would raise his hands, and just as he does this, these orbs would begin to appear. Just as these orbs are appearing, he would see two beings of Namekians. One that looks strong, fierce, one that looks like himself, but another that looks old, withered, someone that looks more elderly and more wise. He would see those two figures as they would disappear and flow within himself. These orbs were known as Dragon Balls, something that he has just created. And just as these Dragon Balls appear in front of him, a giant dragon would appear, just like the one he saw in his vision. But he looks up, he looks staring at the dragon, and he thinks, maybe this is all a part of the plan. Maybe this is exactly what he should be doing. He then asks the dragon, can he unlock the potential of one's user? Can he unlock the potential of himself. The dragon would then roar and say that that wish can be done, granting the wish of Azuku as his aura would flare up like crazy and power would overflow him. He would realize something. This is the true potential of a Namekian, the true potential of the one he's been seeing in his dreams. He then looks at the dragon and asks if he has one more wish. The dragon would nod. The dragon would then ask, what is that last wish? Azuku would then ask the dragon if he can make it so those who are only good can use the Dragon Balls. Just as he says this, the dragon would say that that is within his power, sending the wish, all throughout the world, and then sending the Dragon Balls away for now. Azuku would watch as all of them fly away in different directions of the entire world. He's completely shocked that everything he's been seeing is a complete and utter fact. Yes, of course, he realizes that a lot of the stuff has been portraying itself as fact, and he's been seeing it. But this is something he would never have realized in his wildest dreams. A wish-granting dragon is actually real, and he created it. Wait, does that mean he's, like, a mother? A parent? Too much to think about. Azuku would then fly off and wonder truly how long he's been in meditation, realizing that, he felt like he was there for maybe even months, but he wasn't. He was only there for about 7 days. 7 to about 10 days, Azuku was sitting dormant. He would arrive back in Japan and he would sit on top of a building, looking out at everybody and everything. Azuku would continue just patrolling by himself, alone. Continue looking around, finding small tier villains, defeating them, putting them into prison or whatever as quick as possible. And frankly, nobody would be able to catch him. He's gonna be able to do this for a while. And Hero Society, after a couple days, realizes this, that there's really no reason and no way to stop him. Of course, he is now basically known as this Namekian, a Namekian that patrols the cities and puts fear into villains. The All Might, obviously, the once symbol of peace that would bring down crime rates so much, would now be Azuku. Azuku would continue to do this, scaring villain after villain from even deciding to have a crime, even deciding to do something illegal. Of course, Azuku would just continue on with this path as much as possible. Fighting, defeating, training, that was his life. That's all he cared about, and that's all he will care about. He visits his mother from time to time, and frankly, even if heroes visited her, trying to make a statement, trying to say that if he comes by, they'll arrest him. But Azuku would tell his mother not to worry at all. That there's really nothing for her to even worry about at any moment. That they're not going to do anything, they're not going to arrest him, and he's doing what he believes is best for the entirety of Japan and frankly the world. She questions what he means by the world, and he says that he's been patrolling everywhere. He's been going to Japan. He's been going to places in Europe and anywhere you can think of. He's been going to America. He's been scouring the entirety of the world more and more and more. Of course, nobody necessarily is there to even stop him, and eventually in America, he would run by somebody very interesting. Actually running by the #1 pro hero in America, forcing him to stay still. And he actually speaks with her for a little bit, saying that he's one heck of a fan and loves her work, but says that he has really nothing to do with any of this. He begins to tell her that their fight won't really matter. Maybe they can spar sometime, be some good training, but at the end of the day, putting him away into prison, putting him away in anything, just doesn't mean much. As she obviously figures out the name of him, she deems it so that he can no longer move. But just obviously when she does this, Azuku would begin moving, saying that he isn't Azuku Midoriya. He's neither Azuku or the last Namekian. He's something entirely different. So to her, well, that just won't work. Azuku then walks over, or flies over, and shakes her hand, saying that she's doing a really good job, and that he respects that entirely. He would fly off at insane speeds back toward Japan and continue his patrols. But soon, he would get an earful of something going on. The one and only, the Shiahazaikai overhaul is about to lay siege. Let's just say there's some things he has going on in this world, has some things going on that he wants to occur. He wants to reset society, and Sir Night-Eye and his agency is currently on pace to shut it down. And Azuku would learn more about this when he stopped dead in his tracks with somebody with 1 million on his chest. Lemillion. Right in front of him. This hero is something that Azuku is interested in for sure, because he can tell that Lemillion is the one and only, well, next symbol of peace, because he is wielding One for All on top of his original Quirk. Azuku would then smile as he looks toward Lemillion and says that if he is here, then he must have some information and wants some help. Lemillion would smile and says that he does, of course, but first he wants a bit of a spar. Azuku would grab him and then fly him out to a nearby, a desert that he used to be at. Azuku would look around and tell him that over here, well, let's just say he did a lot of meditation, a lot of relaxation, and a lot of thinking out here, learning about who exactly he is. And this will be a perfect place for a bit of a spar and a perfect place for their battlefield. And after, they can go take down Overhaul and stop whatever he has in mind for society. Now standing in a desert facing Mirio Togata, other known as Lemillion. Of course, this is now the successor of One for All, or the successor of All Might. Mirio, powered up with One for All, takes a charge at Azuku and immediately begins to land punches and bunches as much as possible. But Azuku seems to be just backing up, letting these hits land and parrying a couple as they go. This is seen to be as a teaching lesson for Azuku. Yeah, he may not be older in technicality than Mirio, but he's wise beyond his years. He begins to block, parry, and soon none of the punches begin to connect. Basically countering and getting rid of all the punches that Togata or Mirio gets throws at him, and immediately Mirio is forced to using his Quirk, or both of his Quirks, One for All and also Permeation. This does take Azuku for surprise, and he's able to land some more punches, but that's really about it. Azuku would eventually gauge the timing of Permeation, and right when Mirio comes out of it, he lands a clean punch to the jaw and then a clean kick to the chest. He begins to counter him over and over again, timing him up with his supreme speed, and let's just flat out say, Azuku is way faster than Mirio. His power has skyrocketed from the last time they've seen him at UA, and Azuku continues to climb in his potential. Every time Mirio gets close, he gets hit with multi-punch combos. And here and there, Azuku would throw a ki blast his way. Eventually, the fight would be stopped by Azuku himself, telling Mirio that this fight doesn't need to go on any longer, that he'll handle or deal with this whole, overhaul Shiahazaikai incident. Of course, Mirio says that he doesn't need to do it alone, and Azuku says he's not going to do it alone. As he stands there in front of Mirio, his multi-form technique begins to be revealed, seeing multiple of himself, or multiple versions of this Namekian. 8, in fact. Azuku says this cuts his power, but he's far stronger than most of the people that will be there, and if it comes down to it and he needs to power up, he'll need to power up and he'll get rid of some of the other clones. He begins to tell Mirio that there's no reason to allow anybody else to get hurt, but Mirio disagrees, saying that they're not going to get hurt, that they're there to help. So if he wants to have 8 versions of himself scatter along to help others, he can do that, because it frankly would be beneficial to heal others in a mass amount, in which Azuku thinks this is a good idea as well, and decides to meet up with the Night Eye Agency and whoever else is going on this mission. He would arrive and see various people from UA and teachers as well. Of course, they would ask him if he's ever coming back, but he would deny the fact that there was any reason for him to. And frankly, if they want to arrest him, they would have a really hard time doing so, and it won't matter at the end of the day. Yes, he's deemed as a vigilante, but there is a reason why they're asking him for help, because they know he's not a bad guy, and that they know that he's extremely strong. And as normal, they would read the rights to the Shihazaikai base, and the whole fight would begin right there. A giant human-like monster, or a seemingly big giant dude, would come barreling out of the Shihazaikai base. Azuku would fly up and stop him in a matter of seconds, slamming him to the ground, surprising everybody in the base and surprising everybody outside of the base. They would charge the Shihazaikai facility, and Azuku would blast through the walls that would begin cutting them off. Mirio, of course, would just permeate and fly through them, as Azuku and him begin to charge toward this so-called overhaul. Mirio would tell him that they have a young girl captive, and that he wasn't able to save her last time. And Azuku says that it doesn't matter now, that they're gonna save her right now. Azuku would begin to speed blitz with Mirio through every single hall, and he left a couple clones, not actually doing an entirety of 8 because he felt like he doesn't need a squadron of them, so his power is still relatively strong. He begins to blitz through, and after wall, they finally come across Overhaul. Overhaul turns to see Mirio, but then he sees a green arm, and then a green leg. Oh no. He turns fully around to see the last Namekian, the known vigilante, the vigilante Namekian. Of course, that's what he knows him as. No one really knows him as Azuku Midoriya, and Overhaul is on the bridge of being terrified, realizing that this is bad, this is not good at all, sending spikes toward them, but Azuku immediately is in front of Overhaul, telling him that this is where the line ends, and it ends now. Overhaul immediately tries to touch Azuku, but Azuku would dodge, grabbing him by the arm, throwing him through the wall, telling him that there is no power, there is no Quirk that can help him dissemble or basically exceed this gap that's between them. Overhaul immediately starts calling in his cronies and begins to absorb them, gaining more and more strength, and Azuku allows him to do so. He tells Mirio not to worry, to get the little girl out of there, but Overhaul would scream to not touch Eri. Mirio would then leave with Eri in a matter of seconds, and Azuku would block every attack that was sent his way. Azuku would crack his knuckles, crack his neck, and throw off the weighted clothing, throwing it straight toward Overhaul as it slams into his chest, or his deformed chest at least at this moment. Azuku tells him that he said it once again. There's no way to close this gap. Overhaul doesn't believe it. Maybe he just doesn't want to believe it. He begins losing his mind, trying to kill Azuku, doing everything in his power, doing everything he can possibly think of. Azuku shakes his head and says, once again, there is no basically getting out of this, not without being in prison. Azuku would send a ki blast at his chest, and it would do minor damage, and Overhaul would cynically laugh, thinking that maybe that was more or less the best he can do. But Azuku shakes his head, that was just a warm-up. He begins to send more and more blasts toward him, and they begin to hurt more and more. But Azuku tells him that he might be able to recover from that, and he expects him to. But that's the thing. Overhaul needs to be taught a lesson, that what he's doing here is unholy. It is unearth-like. It's horrible. Something that Azuku would never dream of somebody doing, especially in this world, but it seems like they're doing it, torturing a little girl for the sake of their own skin, for the sake of their own agenda. Azuku would begin to float in the air, staring at him, telling him that this form is something he hasn't even shown anybody. He didn't even show All for One, and frankly, he may have not had it during that time, but now he does, and this will instill fear in him. Azuku's skin begins to change color, changing to this bright but subtle at the same time orange. The symbol on his chest and back begins to change, and it seems like it's a symbol of the Namekians. He begins to grow in power, and a shockwave all around the city can be felt. It feels like an earthquake that is about to collapse the entire city, but it then calms down as if it was peaceful. Calms down as if everything is so subtle. His aura alone is terrifying. It gives images of all the Namekians that were of his past, images of all of Overhaul's wrongdoings. Immediately, Azuku would grab him by the face, slamming him into the ground. He begins to beat on him so bad that he coughs up and more or less disintegrates off of different people. All the people that he absorbed or basically put within him are getting shelled out as if they are basically getting thrown up or getting expelled from him. Azuku continues to beat on Overhaul until he's just laying there in a comatose state. He grabs him by the chest and flies him out. He hovers above everybody, saying that Overhaul has now been finished, that this fight is over, telling the rest of the Shiha Zaikai that this fight is basically in the end game. Immediately though, Overhaul wakes up, grabbing onto Azuku's arm and scratching it. But Azuku just looks at him. Nothing happened. Why didn't anything happen? What's going on? Azuku stares at him and throws him toward the ground, and Azuku rips off his arm and then regrows it, saying that he almost had it. So close. But his body is so durable that it would have taken way longer for his body to more or less realize that that quirk was going to activate within his system. It wasn't just a little scratch that would do it. That would take maybe 1 to 2 minutes to get through his arm to any proper nervous system. But since he rips off his arm and regrows it, it doesn't exist within his body no more. And maybe if he did a big gash into his arm, it might have happened in 15 to 20 seconds, but what's stopping him from ripping his arm off again and just regrowing it? He stands in front of Overhaul, telling him that all of this was useless. Overhaul reaches out and tries to do exactly what Azuku said, but he snaps one of his hands and he tells him not to touch him again, or else. He tries to do it once again with his other hand, and his other arm would break. He would throw him on the ground and knock him out with a small karate chop, making sure that he's out cold, telling the other people that are there to look away if they have basically, they're not the best with, human bodies being contorted. Azuku would then throw him over to the police, and the police would say that this is not a way to basically go about yourself. Azuku says that he disagrees. If you look at the way All Might fights, if you look at the way Endeavor fights, all of these people leave them in a comatose state, most likely to never wake up. All Might, unrestricted, uses Detroit smashes, smashing into people and basically not even thinking about what happens to that person. This is a person, Overhaul, someone entirely different, a mob boss that strength exceeds everybody here. This needed to happen. He needed to be taught a lesson, and frankly, he'll be healed up. Just put the cuffs on him. They put the cuffs on him, and Azuku would touch him on the chest, and he would heal up, healing all wounds and basically broken limbs. He would wake up in shock, seeing Azuku in his orange state, backing up and basically passing out once again. The police would take him away, and some other police officers would tell Azuku to put his hands behind his back. Azuku looks at them and shakes his head, and they all look at the other heroes as if they're going to do something. Aizawa walks up and says that, like it or not, there's people that are too powerful to be dealt with like this, especially him. He says straight up that he most likely exceeds Prime All Might, and it doesn't even look like he was trying. It looks like he entered that form at a state of maybe 1 to 10%. He doesn't even know. He can't even conceive how much stronger Azuku has gotten. Azuku slightly smiles and says that he's right. He's gotten that much stronger. So strong that he doesn't even know how strong he is. Azuku would then fly off and basically wouldn't be seen for a while. He would hunt down villain groups. He would hunt down high tier villains in the shadows. They would just go missing, end up in a high security prison in a matter of seconds. They'd be gone, and it would be like a snap of the fingers. Azuku would make sure that everything is safe, everyone is safe. He would watch everyone from UA grow up, become heroes, as if he was this guardian of Earth. Guardian of Japan? No. He needed to be something like the guardian of Earth. He needed to be something that could watch over everyone. He would then live in the deserts, in a desert that he once knew, and he would begin building something that was infused of Ki itself, but also infused of his own power in general. Azuku would build a giant tower, one that would basically look over everything possible. He would sit up there with various things built in that distance, recruits many others that were just like him, people that were reincarnates, people that he eventually found throughout his life. He began to watch over Earth just like a guardian once did in his past life, just like someone that he knew as a Namekian named Kami, someone that is technically within his power. He begins to watch over Earth, watch the Dragon Balls be used every so often, not as frequent as you would possibly imagine, but he would watch as all of these things occurred. He would help out from here to there, sometimes in the US, sometimes in Japan, sometimes in Europe, anywhere you can possibly think of, he would be if they truly need it. And this would create such a low criminal rate that heroes would eventually have more time off. Heroes become a lot less prevalent. But of course, yes, criminalization and criminals may be at a low, but they will always spike. New criminals, new motives, and new actions will always be pursued by the people that believe that their way is the correct way. Azuku knows this and would continue to watch over not only Japan, but Earth itself, and watch as Hero Society developed, and also in hopes that the world would be at peace while he was the guardian of Earth. And that is a wrap for What If Deku Was the Reincarnation of Piccolo, the Last Namekian.